It's really a pleasure for my wife and myself to be with you here this evening. But before I start, I want to thank everyone that has been involved with bringing us back to BC. There are so many issues now that have arisen with the introduction of GMOs in 1996 when the first 4 crops were introduced. And I'll go into a lot of the other issues that have arisen, especially the health issue, the environmental issue, especially the control of farmers, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, and especially the harm it has been doing to organic farmers. And I often have said that I believe that a lot of times organic farmers, at least up to 4 or 5 years ago, didn't realize how serious the situation is with the introduction of GMOs. I probably will start with maybe a little bit brief outline of the case that my wife and I had against Monsanto back in 1998 and what has happened since then. So I'll just give a brief review of that. 4 crops, as I said, were introduced in 1996, and one of those crops in Canada was canola. Besides that, there was cotton, soya, and corn, and now, as Lucy has said, also sugar beets, which it has really come as a big surprise. So, but those were the 4 crops in 1996. In 1998, Monsanto laid what they called a patent infringement lawsuit against my wife and myself, where they said we were growing their GMO canola without a license from them. And that was really a shock to us because we had never bought Monsanto seed and we didn't even know anybody from Monsanto. But furthermore, I should just back up a little bit more. Louise and I were known on the prairies, especially we come from east of Saskatoon, as seed developers in canola and seed savers. Like hundreds of thousands of farmers around the years have used their seed from year to year, develop it for the local climatic and soil conditions. So we were known as seed savers and seed developers. I also was, at that time, a member of the provincial parliament, and I was in agriculture in the provincial government, representing my province of Saskatchewan in laws, rules, regulations, both on the provincial level and also in delegations to Ottawa. So that gives you a brief background. So lawsuit laid in 1998 on patent infringement. And believe me, at that time, nobody knew about patent infringement, especially a patent on genes or a patent on higher life forms. So we said to Monsanto at that time, if you have contaminated our canola that we have worked on for over 50 years in developing new varieties, especially on disease control, you should be liable for the damage you have caused us and possibly the loss of our research and development. And so we stood up to Monsanto, and patent laws in Canada come under federal jurisdiction like many other countries of the world. And so it went to Federal Court of Canada, and we had 1 judge. And how often we wished at that time we would have a judge and jury with farmers on that jury that knew and understood farming, but that was not to be. Now it took 2 years to go to trial, and there was pre-trials, mediations, and all those sort of things. And in the 2 years before the trial, Monsanto admitted and agreed in mediation that they had no record of us ever buying their seed or using their seed, but they said the fact that they had contaminated us through patent law, they now own our seed, and we should not have been using it in our research and seeding it from year to year. So that's the basis that it went to court on. And what the judge ruled, and I'll just give some of those rulings, it was that when he said it does not matter, and I'll give the exact wording, it does not matter how a farmer is contaminated. And he went on to specify how that could happen. Cross-pollination with wind, bees, and so on. And also through direct seed movement, farmers hauling their seed, or transportation, seeding, and so on. And he said if that happens, a farmer no longer owns the seeds or plants under patent law. And that really startled, I think, the world, how you could wake up tomorrow morning as a farmer or research person and not own your research or own your seeds or plants. He also ruled that we were not allowed to use our seeds again and to do any further research, and all our research, all our seeds or plants that we have has to be turned over to Monsanto and given to Monsanto, and also we would have to pay a fine. Another ruling he made was this: the level of contamination does not matter. If it's 1%, 2%, or 5%, it doesn't matter. It all goes to Monsanto. Now, there was an interesting thing. Another ruling is I had two scientists come out from the University of Manitoba at Winnipeg to check the 8 canola fields that we had seeded in 1998. Because as research people, we wanted to know ourselves what the level of contamination was and possibly where it came from. And 2 fields, they could find no traces of GMOs or contamination. And what did the judge rule on those 2 fields? He said the fact that we were using our seed from year to year from our fields, there was a probability there also could be some contamination in those 2 fields, and he said that also goes to Monsanto. He then ruled that we had 1,030 acres seeded to canola in 1998. He said all the profit from that 1,030 acres goes to Monsanto because of the contamination. So that is what the ruling was. So we were pretty devastated by that, and we decided then to fight and to stand up to Monsanto. We appealed then to the Federal Court of Appeal. That was granted. We had 3 judges this time, and after another 2 years, they came down with a decision which said that they did not agree with all of the trial judges' decisions, but they still would uphold it. And that, at that point in time, it should have been thrown out of court, but it was not. So we now have spent about $300,000, spent close to 5 years of our life, and had lost twice in the courts. So we had one option left, and that was the Supreme Court of Canada. But once you lose twice in the lower courts, there's not much of a chance that the Supreme Court of Canada will hear it. But we decided to put everything that we own on the line. We mortgaged our land and so on, and decided to seek an appeal from the Supreme Court of Canada. And you can imagine how relieved we were when the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in our favor that they would hear the case. Now, at the Supreme Court, we could not only patent infringement could be brought forward, which was only in the lower courts, but we also could bring in other items that we thought were important. And I think I should mention some of the issues that we brought forward to the Supreme Court. And that was, first of all, can living organisms, seeds, plants, genes, human organs be owned and protected by corporate patents on intellectual property? Another one, can genetically modified traits invade and become noxious weeds that then become resistant to weed killers, which we now have on the prairies, which we call super weeds? Another one we brought forward, can farmers' right to grow conventional or organic crops be protected? Another one, can farmers keep the ancient right to save their own seeds, develop them if they so desire, and use them from year to year? But the last one, I think to my wife and myself by that time, was that who owns life? Really, who owns life? And does any corporation or any individual have the right to put a patent on the future and on life? So those were the main ones before the Supreme Court. Now, what a lot of people don't know, behind the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, Monsanto laid 2 other lawsuits against my wife and myself. The first one was for $1 million that they wanted for all their legal bills, because they said, up to that point in time, because they said my wife and I were arrogant, we were stubborn, and we wouldn't do what Monsanto wanted. So they wanted $1 million. So we were back in court on that $1 million issue also. The other issue that they laid against us, they tried to seize our house, all our farmland, all our farm equipment with caveats and liens, so we had to fight that also. So there was actually 3 cases before the Supreme Court. So what did the Supreme Court rule?